All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Best Self Blueprint. As you all know, the mission of this podcast is to bring on people who have the knowledge, experience, and insights as to what it takes to truly move that dial towards becoming the best version of yourself. So, this next guest is one of the world's leading neuroscientists in sports psychology and human performance. He's made a name for himself not only as a sports psychologist, but also as an entrepreneur, a professor, a researcher, and more. His work has been featured in Forbes 500, ESPN, CNN, Wall Street Journal, and Sports Illustrated, just to name a few on the long list. And it doesn't stop there. He's also a photographer, scuba diving instructor, competitive equestrian, and a private pilot. He has a true passion for guiding others towards a happier, healthier, true version of themselves that I am really inspired by. So, this coupled with his vast knowledge of biofeedback, neurofeedback, human performance optimization, again, just to list a few among many other things, is sure to leave you with a lot to think about and implement. So I am very excited to introduce Dr. Leslie Sherlin, PhD.
Thanks. I must admit that I think it sounds better on paper than it does in real life.
It was really fun just diving into researching your work, researching your story. Like I mentioned before we hopped on, I just think it's really amazing your passion for helping people step into that happy, healthy, true version of themselves. So I don't want to waste any time. I want to dive right in and I want to start by getting into brain state. Specifically, if you could just start by talking a little bit about its impact on how we perceive reality, and then moving into how we can generate, I guess, optimal brain state.
Okay. So really this is something that it's not terribly foreign to people, that you'll be able to like quickly identify with the idea that when you're doing certain things, you feel either good doing it, or you feel less like you're underperforming, or you're not quite in the groove with it. So the general notion of this idea of brain state, maybe we kind of start with kind of an operational definition of that, is that your brain can shift. I mean, we have this psychological flexibility, this neurophysiological flexibility that allows us to adapt to doing what is ideal or performing in a given environment. So, just to illustrate very briefly, when we go to work, we are ideally working in a particular brain state that's like maximizing efficiency, maybe concentration or attention or creativity, whatever your day to day might be. But then as we transition into something different, maybe a competitive environment, that's a different state in order to be maximally successful, and that's very different than going home to the family and sitting on the couch and kind of vegging out, or being in like this conversation or something. So um, each environment or each activity that we ask ourselves to do or engage with requires a different state in order to maximally perform. And unfortunately, lots of times we get a bit rigid in the availability of brain states, and that can be either learned or genetic or from an injury or all sorts of things that cause us to kind of get stuck in a particular state. And then we perform less well when we're in an environment that requires that particular brain state. So the general idea of being in a brain state, or being able to create or transition or shift, is to identify what are those characteristics that are going to be ideal for me to succeed in this particular environment and this particular task, and be able to like modulate ourselves, self-regulate, get into that state from a physiological standpoint, a psychological standpoint, an emotional standpoint, to maximally succeed. So that's kind of the rough edges of what that concept of brain state and moving into a brain state is.
Yeah, so as you're talking about that, I can't help but thinking I hopefully everybody knows what they should be doing in, a given situation, like you said, whether it's work or if you're at the start line of a race when you're competing or hanging out with friends. But there's a gap for, I think, a lot of people between the should and the action.
Yeah.
What are some of the common obstacles that you see holding people between those two, and what are maybe a couple tips and tricks to get through that obstacle?
Yeah, the first part's much easier to answer than the tips and tricks because the variables are so vast. In general, sometimes we don't know what to do. Like, we're making an assumption that we should know what to do when we're at work, or we should know how to be successful in a particular environment. But sometimes that's not a piece of skill that we are taught or that we develop. And in fact, many people, they have a natural physical talent. We'll use an athlete as an example, but this could be appropriate for, a business person or a mom or whoever, whatever the thing is that you're doing. We have a natural capacity or a talent that we uh, develop, and we kind of get into that place. But then at some point we're asked to do or perform at a level, and we may not have had any time or teaching or experience doing it in the ideal way. And so we're kind of creating maladaptive behaviors and processes which really hinder us from maximally performing, even though we're uh, well trained, we're well educated, we're physically ready to do those types of things, and we just don't get there from the mental side of it. So sometimes it's just a matter of we don't know what we're supposed to do or what that brain state is, or like what should I be experiencing in the start gate in order to perform at my best. So that's one piece of it. That's a little bit easier because it's cognitive. We can just sit down with somebody and say, hey, here's what you want to experience. And they go, oh, okay, I get it. And they go do it. But then there's this physiological component, which is much more challenging because, and when I say physiological component, I mean like literally the physical attributes of our body or our brain, more specifically for me. And that's something that's way more challenging because we don't know what it feels like to do something that we haven't ever done before. So, we can apply that to like a clinical situation as an easy illustration. If somebody's has anxiety or they're experiencing anxiety in a moment, and like we say this to our friends all the time, like somebody says, oh, I'm really nervous about such and such, and our natural thing is like, oh, just relax. It's like, well, if I knew what that was or how to do it, don't you think I'd be doing it right now? Anxiety is not the preferred state, just relaxing would be. So sometimes we have a physiological barrier to actually doing the thing. And to make a really quick analogy, if we, like I'm, physically do not look like an NFL quarterback, but if you could create the physical attributes, that still doesn't mean that I have the capacity to do the job. And I could also get really smart. I could have great coaching, great training, but if I don't have the physical attributes, then I also can't succeed. So this is the same in the context of our mental or our brain performance. A lot of people, like, they know what they think they should be doing, like, oh, I want to like get in the starting gate or the the tee box or wherever it is, and like just kind of be calm and relaxed and do my thing. And they have the physical characteristics and they have the coaching, but they don't have that capacity to do it. Their brain gets in their way. And that's usually where I come into play, is helping people understand, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. And so that's where that flexibility really comes into play, of being able to say, here's what it is I'm supposed to do. And I have the capacity to shift into that particular state, even though I've got this underlying, you know, really strong pressure to perform well, or I'm maybe not up for it that day. I'm not 100%, or whatever the circumstance is. Like, how do we get ourselves to get there to maximally perform despite some of those shortcomings? So it's not as straightforward as we might hope, of like saying, oh, go, like how.
Yeah, so and I know obviously based on your past experiences, based on your current like characteristics and perception of life, the route to navigating to that optimal
Mhm.
physiological and psychological point are different for everybody.
Right.
Are there any commonalities or kind of first steps that people could take to identify what those problems are and how to get through them?
Yeah, I think the general strategy might be very similar for most people, which is, and for me, the first step is creating awareness. We largely go through motions, and we have check boxes. If I do these 10 things, I'll be successful. Or we're reading a book, and by the time we get to chapter, the last chapter, we think, okay, I should be an entrepreneur by now because I read that. It's not quite as simple, and so I think the first step for all of us is to create awareness as to what we are experiencing. We just so frequently get so focused on the outcome or the physical, tangible, points or scores or times or whatever it is, and we have no idea what we did to get to that place inside. We skip right over that. We attribute things way more to our skill, our training, or our physical ability rather than our presence in doing the particular thing. So that's, I think, the common starting place, no matter what industry or sport or thing you're trying to achieve.
I completely agree. One thing, obviously, I have a background in mindfulness practice, and it sounds like that is one really good
Yes.
avenue for just the effectiveness of putting yourself into the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, visualization, how directly correlated is that with getting yourself into a more calm state in terms of if someone has anxiety about a certain situation and they visualize it and they practice, okay, not only visualizing if it goes really well, but visualizing and practicing the feeling of when it doesn't and really almost getting more comfortable with it. Have you found that helps at all?
Yeah, so I used to, if this were 2 years ago, I would say the visualization is both critical and important and all of those components, and it's very helpful. And I don't mean to take anything away from that even now, but now, as of late, I'm finding that visualization has a purpose, and that purpose is to help us think through and strategize and actually see ourselves doing the task correctly. And there is that repetition, so we can't be in the field or doing the thing. There is a really strong piece from our brain that, like, in fact, in our brain, if we're executing perfectly in our visualization or we're executing perfectly in real life, brain doesn't really decipher those as different things. They're the same experience. So it's great for building confidence or really knowing what our plan of attack is when we get there. So that's good preparation. So it's definitely good mental prep. And we kind of put that in the mental skill development category. But then this other piece, this mindfulness and this awareness that we're talking about, I think kind of sits in a different place. And that different place is saying, my experience with what I visualized they may not be congruent. So if the caution about over visualizing and over relying on that is that we are now comparing ourselves in this moment to that thing which we imagined, and that will absolutely destroy the opportunity of us being present, right? Because we're always doing that comparative thing. So it's good to understand in advance that, yeah, this is how we execute perfectly and do that practice, but also what are those contingencies, and if it doesn't go well, it's okay. So playing that out is totally a good thing. But most important is in that moment, just saying, okay, I'm here, I'm prepared, or I'm as prepared as I'm going to be. So let me just do this thing. And if it's uncomfortable, okay, it's uncomfortable. And really that's one of this one illustration of, like, if we believe that challenge is like creates this increased capacity for being comfortable in an uncomfortable situation, then we want to invite that rather than try to avoid it. And that's a really common thing. If we say, oh, I've got the jitters in the starting block and I need to make it go away, it's like, no, let's don't make it go away. Let's just say, where's that come from? What is that experience like? Okay, now how can I perform in the presence of jitters rather than trying to figure out how to fix it or get rid of it?
Yes, and that is something. So I coach some youth athletes as well
Mhm.
for the sport of Ninja Warrior, and I've had a couple of them come up and ask, "Well, how do I get rid of that pit in my stomach
Mhm.
when I'm about to run?" I said, "That's not necessarily a bad thing. That just means you care about what you're doing."
Yeah, exactly.
And but I completely agree with the idea of you need to almost lean into it. So not try to avoid it or evade
Right.
it, but lean into that feeling and try to leverage it.
Right.
Now, this is a good segue into something you sent me before we hopped on about there's a difference between pain and suffering. And I think
Mhm.
that ties into physical, mental, emotional, you name it. if you could talk about the concept of pain versus suffering, I think that is really important.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I wish I could claim that idea as my own, but it's not. Stephen Hayes and many others in the world of acceptance and commitment therapy have talked about this concept quite a bit. But the basic idea is that we experience discomfort just from whatever, either illness, injury, bad stuff happens to us that are kind of outside of our control, or sometimes it is in our control to some degree, but things happen to us that aren't comfortable or are unpleasant. And we'll kind of identify and call that the pain. That it doesn't matter what I think about it or what I feel about it, it's just happening. It is what it is, so to speak. And then there's the suffering, which is what we bring to it. So if I sustain an injury, it hurts, it's uncomfortable, I can't perform, maybe I can't play. And that hurts me both physically and emotionally and psychologically. But then what I do with that is the suffering piece. And generally speaking, it's much easier for us, and we tend to do this as people. We go to the dark place of, I should have this or I could have that, and I'm now not able to do X or Y, and this is so awful, and now I've missed all this time. Like, we catastrophize it sometimes, but we at least kind of start digging a deeper hole when the reality of the thing that happened to us doesn't change. Our experience of that thing changes. And so by piling all this suffering onto it, we end up making things so big and so overwhelmingly bad that we have a hard time getting out of it. Where we could reframe this into a way of saying, the pain is happening, it is transient, it's temporary. How can I experience this in this moment and potentially even turn it into something that's beneficial for me down the road? So maybe that injury gives me more time to focus on some other attributes or aspects of my performance, or it gives me time to go back and learn a little bit, or go back to the basics even of, whether it's biomechanical basics or just the level of competition or performance that we're doing, getting back to that beginning. So that changes this pain as both something that we're not trying to get rid of so we can get to somewhere else, but turns it into an opportunity for us and pushes that comfort zone, so to speak, of saying, okay, now how can this create a more resilient version of me to perform better later? So the basic, again, like really summary idea is, the pain is what we encounter and we can do nothing about, but that suffering is what we add onto it. And we all are like vulnerable to doing that, because we do have aspirations, or we do have goals, or achievement or objectives out there that we want to do, when reality, again, like leaning into this idea of, okay, here I am, let me fully experience this injury or this moment, whatever this pain is. And by sitting with it and being in it, we can spend way more energy trying to escape it and instead turn it into something.
Yeah. So I want to highlight particularly the thing when you mentioned you can either let it turn you into, oh, I can't believe this happened, this ruins. Again, for me, I always go back to fitness just because that's my domain, if you will. If someone gets injured and they can't do a certain set of workouts, oftentimes you'll hear a complaint about, oh, I wish I could be doing this. But I love that flip of, don't think about what it's taking away. Think about what it's allowing you more time to do that
Right.
maybe otherwise you've been neglecting, and just go back to the drawing board and make the most of the
Right.
situation. Don't, if you really do need time to mourn, and this is something I'd love your opinion on. I think if it's really something that's tragic and you need time to mourn, by all means, take a reasonable amount of time for yourself, whatever you think is a reasonable amount of time. But while you're doing that, flip the script and think about, okay, what is this giving me the opportunity to do?
Yeah,
What's
absolutely.
your opinion on mourning if something really is like a serious injury or a career ending injury? Then what's kind of the process for how you mourn that and internalize it?
Yeah, so I mean, the first piece is recognizing that it is a big deal. Because we're willing to accept the current situation and sit with it and be more okay rather than trying to evade it, doesn't mean that it's any less uncomfortable or disappointing. It is. I mean, particularly in the scenario that you mentioned of a career-ending injury, like we had probably goals and aspirations and wishes and fantasies of whatever life would be like if we progressed down that path, and now that's gone. So it's important to really be okay with the idea that that does suck. I mean, there's just and that's okay, and like it hurts, and feel that pain. It's because it's meaningful. You've invested time and energy and skill and all these things into it. But then very pretty quickly, we need to both be acknowledging that and then exploring, at least being curious about what opportunity is this setting me up for? Is it that, I thought I was going to be a great performer in this thing, but now because of what got me to this point, it allows me to be the top coach, the top mentor. Like, how does this shift my opportunity? And that really is hard for us because we get really out in front of ourselves with projecting what life should be. And I love that we keep saying this word should, because we often say to my clients anyway, and I've heard other people do it too, like, don't should yourself so much. And like, there isn't this should. Like, that was one path, and that would have been great, but here's a different path. And what is that? How can we be curious about what opportunity is here? And I think that ultimately ends up healing those wounds much more effectively and quicker than us just getting over it and going, oh, well, that's not my path anymore. I guess I'm done. Now, what do I want to do? It's like, no, this can just be a fork in the road. It doesn't mean I'm on a different path. I'm just going in a slightly different direction.
I love that. Don't should yourself. That is, I'm gonna have to use that one
Yeah, yeah,
with a couple people. Now I wanna pivot a little bit just because I think this is a really powerful topic as well. Again, I don't know if you coined this. I'm sure you've heard it somewhere. I've heard this before, but I want to talk about failure isn't really failure.
yeah.
If you could just talk about what you meant when you were talking about that to me and go into the fact that failing doesn't mean you're a failure, but also how to move past failing at a certain task or a certain objective.
Sure. So there's a bunch of concepts kind of baked into that idea of a failure isn't really a failure, and we've heard cliches all the time. And if you pick up an entrepreneurial book or you listen to any person who's made a bajillion dollars in the startup industry, any of those places, they'll tell you, like, fail often, fail fast, like all these kinds of things. But failing kind of sucks, and we don't want it. Like, that's not what we say. Like, I'm going to go out and see how many different ways I can fail today so I can be better tomorrow. That's not like our real objective. So it still hurts when it happens, but we've got all these little quotes and things that we say to ourselves, but that doesn't really take a hold for us. Really, it's usually, at least if you're anything like me, when somebody spouts off a failure quote, I want to like give it back to them a little bit in a not nice way. But the general idea here is that, one, we have to really there is some truth in those expressions, because we learned one way of not getting the job done, but it doesn't mean that we're a failure. um, so there's a piece in there that we have to really acknowledge, is that our outcomes are not who we are. So if I don't make it onto the podium, or I don't win the game, or I don't get the promotion, or whatever that thing is, that's not that I am a failure. It is that thing that I was doing didn't succeed in that moment. Maybe it was exactly the right thing, just not in that moment. And this reminds me of, I'll illustrate this with, I was working on a project with Red Bull North America, and we had some golfers come in, and we were trying to see how pressure affected novice and professional and like really master elite kind of people. And in the final run of it, we did this multiple times anyway. In the final run of it, Ricky Fowler was the golfer, and he said something that stuck with me all these years. we were just having him putt some like balls around on a putting green, measuring his physiology and all these things. Anyway, and I'm counting how many did he get in. And I said, "You missed three at the end." And he says, "No, I missed two. One of them didn't go in." I kind of scratched my head a little bit. He's like, "I did, tell me about that." He says, "I did everything exactly like I meant to do it. I executed exactly like I meant to do. The ball just didn't go in." So, that would, we could call that a failure because the ball didn't go in the hole, but it wasn't. It was like I executed exactly like I wanted to. I would do it exactly like that. It was just some variable environmentally or otherwise. It just didn't fall in the cup. So it was the same as going in for him. It was like, whatever. And so that was a really important piece, I think, of like a saying, okay, wait, did I fail? Did it not succeed? Did I not get the outcome that I wanted? Or did I fail? Like, did it just, like, was it really, I didn't do any of the things that I should have done or wanted to do. And so there's like that element that's in there of just because we don't get the end result doesn't mean it was a waste or that we even did anything wrong. And then lastly is this learning opportunity that happens in every time that we don't hit the mark. And sometimes the stakes are higher than they are at other times. I mean, is it game one of the season, or is it the Super Bowl or the World Series? Is it you know uh, a regional thing, or is it the Olympics? Like, the stakes do matter, but ultimately, each of those moments where we don't rise to whatever expected level that we have for ourselves in the future doesn't mean that we haven't done something very meaningful and very successful just because we didn't get to that outcome that we wanted. And so that's ultimately the takeaway there, is that we are the ones who put the expectation. If I said to any aspiring young athlete, "Hey, would you like to get a silver medal?" They would say, "Absolutely, sign me up for that." But for some reason, when the moment happens and they get the silver medal, they're like, "I didn't get the gold, I failed." No, we got, like, you achieved, even if it's just making it to the game. So anyway, that's a success and failure is a subjective thing. And that's the point, is the outcome may not align with our subjective experience.
And I think too, with that, the reason a lot of people get upset when they don't podium, like you said, or get the placement they want or the time they want is because, as you're mentioning, they're focused on comparison.
Yep.
When really, what I preach more than anything for myself as an athlete and for the people I coach, base it on your effort. Are you proud of the effort you put in to prepare for that race or for that event or for that talk you were giving? And if you're really proud of the effort and you knew you did everything you could, there's no reason to kick yourself. You did everything you could. It's hard to do more than everything you can do.
Right.
And then tying into what you also mentioned about, I think another important piece of that is, okay, great. If you want to compare to the podium, to your time, great. If you didn't get it and you feel you did everything you could do, as we mentioned earlier, go back to the drawing board. Did you eat and optimize nutrition? Did you optimize your training? Did you optimize recovery? And you can go back to the drawing board and analyze it without emotionally attaching that sense
Yep.
of failure to it. So I think that's
Yep.
really important.
Yeah, and in the illustration that you just mentioned, it's like, where is the opportunity for next time? It's not, "I failed at this one, let me go back to the drawing board," because going back to the drawing board is what we do when we're not when we fail. It's like, let's go back to the drawing board so we can critically evaluate where is our opportunity for bumping our performance next time. It's an opportunity moment. And it's hard in that moment because it's painful. We did want, or we did try to achieve a particular thing. And that's where that challenge of getting too tied onto the outcome is the problem, rather than being tied to the process. And how did I get here? And was that a good performance? Did I have fun doing it? I mean, like, countless professional athletes that I've collaborated with, they like, "I just want to have fun again. It's not fun anymore. I want to be in the backyard with my dad." It's like, these are like big time people doing big time stuff, and there's a lot on the line, and financially, and everybody would call them a success by most all metrics, but they're like, I don't enjoy it. I don't want to do it. It's no fun. So like that process of, am I having fun? Am I doing my best? Am I gradually looking for opportunities to improve and maximize my performance, and forget the outcome stuff? If we go home with a trophy, great. But if we don't, it doesn't mean we didn't succeed.
That is an amazing point to hit. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, I think this is a good segue into, I know you're big on this, I am as well, the growth mindset.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for people who have a fixed mindset or are just starting to learn about a growth mindset? What a is a growth mindset for people who don't know what that is? And then how do you cultivate that and work into living with a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed?
Yeah. So I'm going to really resist the temptation of like going by like a definition. Like that would be really easy right now to say, okay, growth mindset, this is fixed mindset. But I think what might land with people, and certainly it lands with me, and so this is the way I internalize it myself, is that the growth mindset is just simply saying, how has this moment, how is this experience an opportunity for me to be uncomfortable and be okay with it, for me to push my boundary, for me to get that much better, even if it's just that much? Like, how can I tweak this as a learning opportunity rather than some predestined outcome based on what I've put into it up to this point? So we see this illustrated all the time where we think, X number of hours of practice and rehearsal and strength and conditioning and all these kinds of things. We take icons and we say, this is what their routine was, and this is what their nutrition or their supplement or whatever it is. And we think that that yields success. And we can replicate that and not hit whatever that same outcome is. So the growth mindset simply says, how can I be curious about what is happening to me? And it may be very unique to me to make this a opportunity rather than just a moment of not getting to somewhere else. And so the fixed mindset generally is, again, this idea that we're having this predetermined idea that this is just the way it is because of what I put into it, and here's where I am, and I should have done more, done this, done that, whatever. Instead, it's like, no, no, no. All of those experiences gave me the chance to learn what I got here and how can I change this experience. And this is why it all ties into that brain state opportunity. This failure isn't a failure. Like all these concepts kind of go into that in a big camp way of saying, what's the opportunity right now? How is this pain? How is this loss or comparative thing? How is that making me stronger and better rather than turning inward and sulking and wishing and shoulda, coulda, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that I want to dissect one piece you talked about of trying to be almost like a carbon copy of,
Mm-hmm.
if you see, if let's say I want to go to the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, but let's say I do. I study LeBron James. I study what he did from my age with training, with nutrition, with relationships, everything. And I just follow it to a T and I don't get the results. It's because, like you said, you're not that person. You don't have the physiology, the psychology, any of the same things, except for the fact that you're both living beings. That is kind of the point of this show, is to bring on people such as yourself who have these ideas, have these principles, so that people can extract the principle from the person and
Yes,
use it in a way that really associates with their life.
that's
And
right.
so I'm really happy you brought that
Yeah,
up.
that's great because ultimately that's it. There isn't a single path to get to those places. I mean, you can take any, whatever your flavor of interest is, a sport or a business or whatever. There's not a single path to get there, and we see wide and varied types of stories and experiences that made those individuals get to where they are. And oftentimes, one of the things that we forget to look at and be willing to embrace is the challenges and the things that they had to overcome, the pain part of the experience that made them get where they are or help facilitate them getting there. Oftentimes we're willing to put in the work, but we're not really willing to sit with pain. And if we think about what does it take to get to that place, sometimes we might not, we want the good side of it, but maybe not the discomfort side of it that's so much part of the experience.
Yeah, I do it a little different than I'm sure most people do. I try to make sure every day I do something that's a little uncomfortable
Mhm.
in various areas. And I think that just puts into perspective, A, how grateful I should be to have the things I have and live the life I live and all of that. But also, I think it does a good job of keeping you in your place in a sense
Yeah.
and keeping you understanding that comfort isn't where you're going to learn or grow. It's a good place of celebration, I
Yeah.
guess. But yeah, there's so much more on the other side of comfort that I think people need to experience.
Yeah, and I wish that your audience hopefully takes you up on that statement that you just made of like find some way every day, whether it's for me I like to hop in the shower before the water gets warm because I know it's temporary. It's teaching me that the water will get warm and it stinks right now. This is awful, but it's pushing my comfort zone to be a bigger thing. So now when something is slightly uncomfortable, like it's okay, it'll pass. I don't even have to put any mental effort on that physical discomfort in that moment because I know it's just going to go away. It's fine. I know how to do my thing with while being in the present of discomfort. So making that grow and like you said, if we know that that's what makes us resilient and able to overcome challenge more readily, we should invite that into our life. Say, how can I make myself just this much more uncomfortable today in some aspect of my life and be okay with it and just sit with it, experience it and go, oh, okay, that's what discomfort feels like. It's not so bad. Let me go on with my business and you do your thing.
Absolutely. Yes, I completely agree. So I do for everybody on the podcast, I do a final two questions. But before that, just because I think there are a lot of people who would love to keep up with your research or possibly even ask you questions. Is there anywhere people can go to connect with you, ask questions, or again, follow your work, follow what you're doing?
Oh wow! Not there's not a centralized place. I mean, certainly you can hit me up on all the social media types of places. The all of my um, uh, IDs are at Leslie Sherlin. Pick your flavor of social media, and then just following. That's probably the easiest place. I'll put the major things there, but people are always welcome to reach out and touch base in person via email or something like that to pose a question or follow up on something.
Perfect. Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who could learn a lot from you. So hopefully
Yes.
people take you up on that and even just simply follow your work. It has impacted millions of lives, if not hundreds of millions of lives. So definitely take them up on that, anyone who's listening. Now, for the final two, it's the same two questions for everybody. So the first one is what right now for you is the biggest obstacle between you and your best self?
Oh, um, let's see. That's a really tough question, actually. Hopefully, people give that. I mean, because there's so much in there. I have two responses. The first is that in this moment, as I'm sitting here, I'm living my best version of myself. And so it's really hard to both, on the one hand, have spent the past, whatever number of minutes we've been together saying, hey, be here now and don't think about the future so much and put all your eggs in that outcome basket. And then say, well, here's what's preventing me. Um, so in this moment, you're looking at my best version, but I do want more out of experience and life and all those kinds of things. And I think that's an important kind of takeaway for people too, is to think about I can both be content in this moment and still want to grow and achieve and aspire for more. We sometimes equate contentment to meaning, oh well, this is it. That's done. I've gotten to the pinnacle of whatever I can achieve, and it's not true. So for me, challenges always include not getting wrapped up in all the other stuff. And by other stuff, I mean social and political and cultural and, all the negative kind of things and comparisons that we do. This has probably been the thing that has always challenged me is not comparing myself to so many other smart people who are out there who achieve great things and publish, more papers, and they do more, more, more. There's always somebody who's more. We've got to stop thinking about that. And good to acknowledge them and good to be inspired by them. But that's their path, not our path. So really being okay with who we are is I think that's the challenge for me. And I think most people.
It is uncanny how similar your answer is to that question as my answer is. I go back to, there's a guy named Ed Milet, really successful entrepreneur, and he talks about the term joyfully dissatisfied.
Hmm.
And that to me is my answer to that question, where as of right now, I think I'm living in my purpose. I think I'm doing the things I need to do daily. I do a good job of taking the moment as it is and just making the most of it. But at the same rate, I'm the same exact way, where obviously I'm human. I have that vision of the future, and there is more I want to do, want to achieve, want to become. And so I think that's important for people to hear. You can be living as your best self in the moment and know that you can still get even better.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm really glad you answered that the way you did, because
Oh,
that was that was exactly how I've been hoping to hear that answered for a while.
okay.
Now, the final question is a direct challenge for the listeners. So if you could just, obviously there are a ton of things people could do to improve themselves, but if you could pick one challenge to give to the people listening, where once it's implemented or once they start doing it, they'll notice a change for the better in their life, what would be one challenge you have for them? One thing they could do?
So I'm going to do, well, I can't do just one. I have to do two.
Perfect. Even better.
Because one is very physical and very practical. It's the thing when you go, gee, I don't know what to think about or what to do. This is the thing that we can all just like. It's very tangible, and that's to breathe, and to breathe better and on purpose in an intentional way. We generally either forget about it or don't think about it, or think it's just so basic that it doesn't have a meaning. And so I think either whether that's through just being intentional about taking deliberate breaths, and there's tons of books and videos and people and all sorts of things out there on that, so I don't need to elaborate or waste time on that. But being purposeful and like doing breathing exercises daily um, really changes our physiology and the way that we experience our environment. So that's super simple, everybody can do it. You don't have to go anywhere, or nobody knows you're doing it, but just being intentional and finding a breath practice to do. So that's tangible. And then the second piece, which is a little bit more squishy, is to just really be curious about our experiences without judgment. And I think, just that comparison, that beating ourselves up, not say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to other people. If I have somebody in my life that I really care about, and they are trying to get to their next place in life, or they're trying to overcome something, or I wouldn't beat them up. I wouldn't say, "Oh, you coulda and you should have that," and all those things. Hopefully, I'm not saying those things to them, but we say that to ourselves all the time. So I think the challenge would be to be curious and pay attention to how you talk to yourself, and do so with less judgment.
Those are two really good ones. So I always make sure the guests that I have on know I will be doing those as well. Now, breath work I do every day, but I will definitely post or let people know my experience with that. I think
Mhm.
a big thing to look into for people who question whether breath work is worth it is look up parasympathetic versus sympathetic breathing
Yeah.
and how that can transition back into a more restful state. So if you question it, the science backs it up. The
Oh,
scientist also backs it up. So definitely do that. And then that's something that I don't notice myself doing nearly as often since I've been a lot
mhm.
more mindful. But there are some times where I just have those preconceived notions that block me from just experiencing something, and I have that judgment towards it.
Yep.
So what I'll do is I'll let you know in the next week. I'm going to track the times where I notice that pop up, and I'll let you know how I kind of combat that.
That's great. I love it.
Perfect. All right. So that is it for the informational part of this. For everybody listening, as usual, if you have questions, definitely comment below. And if there's someone you know who is in need of this information, that is why they put a share option on these videos. Share with people who you think really could use this information. There are a lot of powerful things in here. There are a lot of practical aspects, a lot of inspirational aspects. So try to get this information out to people. Dr. Sherlin, I want to thank you for not only taking the time because your information is invaluable, but also just setting the example you have, living the life you've lived of amazing accomplishment, diving deep into your passion, and also following different pursuits and different hobbies and really making a life worth living and making a life that is so inspirational to so many people. I want to thank you for that.
Oh, that's very flattering. Thank you.
Absolutely. And then for everyone listening, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.